Christ's command to the disciples as they were fishing. What was his simple command, his simple order to them? It's the title of the sermon. Cast the net on the right side. Not on the Democratic side. Why is it always the right side? You know, why is the conservatives the right and the Democrats are the left? I don't know. Maybe there's something to that. Kind of like the numbers, reading some significance into that. But he says, cast the net on the right side of the boat. Now the problem with that is that this command didn't make sense. These were professional fishermen, had been fishing their whole lives. Their fathers were fishermen. They had all the skills. They had all the knowledge. They had all the tools. They knew what to do. And casting the net on the right side was not one of those things. It was not one of those skills or tactics. Jesus was telling them to do something that didn't make sense. And for them to obey that order, it took trust. Even though we don't understand, we're going to trust, we're going to put it on the right side, and then sure enough, they caught a great catch. Obedience requires trust because you're not always going to understand God's commands. They're not always going to make sense. What do we need to trust to be obedient? First of all, we need to trust that God knows better than us. We need to trust that God knows better than us. Just because I can't see it doesn't mean God can't see it. Just because I don't understand it doesn't mean God doesn't understand it. Just because it doesn't make sense to me doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense. Just like a father is much smarter than his 5-year-old daughter. God is much smarter than you and me. He has all knowledge. He sees the beginning and the ending, all in between, all at the same time. He knows what's best. You know, there are many commands in the Bible that simply don't make sense. For example, the Bible prohibits divorce. And you know, there are a lot of people that are unhappily married. And you may ask, why in the world does God want me to be stuck with this ball and chain? To be stuck in misery. It's not an abusive marriage necessarily. It's not a marriage where one partner has been adulterous or anything like that, unfaithful. It's just, we just don't get along. We're incompatible. Why would God want us to stay together? Well, researchers have done all kinds of studies on the effects of divorce. They found that those who divorce suffer higher rates of alcoholism, illness, depression, mental illness, and suicide. In fact, a Yale researcher found that the effect of divorce on your health is the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Divorce is just as bad on your physical health as smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. God knows what's best. God knows what's best. We need to trust Him. The second thing you have to trust in order to be obedient is that God loves you. God loves you. In other words, His will is going to be what's best for you. God's commands are not for our misery. They're not just for His glory. They're always for our good. Always for our good, even if we don't understand. When God says don't, He means don't hurt yourself. When God says do this, He means do this for your own good. God is the most loving Father. When a loving father sets rules for his children, it's for their protection. It's for their happiness. Jesus commands us, for example, to stay away from lust. We just talked about that with Stephen Arterburn's story. He commands us to stay away from lust and to stay away from pornography. And we might ask, what's the big deal? It's private. Nobody knows. It doesn't seem to affect anybody. It doesn't seem to affect me. As long as it's just me and private, I'm just looking at pictures. What's the big deal with lust? What's the big deal with pornography? Researchers have been studying the effects of porn for several decades now. They've found that married men who watch porn are twice as likely to divorce. Porn shrinks the brain and reduces neural activity. In other words, porn actually makes you dumber. Porn is addictive. It leads to violence, destroys relationships, and feeds sex trafficking and prostitution. It victimizes women. Those who watch porn are more likely to say that they would commit rape or sexual assault if they knew they wouldn't be caught. No wonder God tells us, avoid that stuff. It's for our good. And we also need to trust that God is worthy. If we're going to be obedient, we have to trust that God is worthy. Trust that He knows best. Trust that He loves us. Trust that He's worthy. God deserves our obedience, whether we understand it or not. Whether we understand how this benefits us or not, He deserves it. God created us from nothing. He saved us from hell through the suffering of the cross. Every breath, every heartbeat are gifts of grace from God to undeserving sinners. He brought us into this world. He literally can take us out. He deserves our obedience. God is perfectly good. He's never done anything wrong to you. He's never sinned against you. He's never lied. He's never let you down. He deserves your obedience. Jesus doesn't need it. He doesn't need your obedience. He deserves it. So obedience requires trust, because sometimes God commands us to do things that we don't understand, like cast the net on the right side. You may not understand, but listen, you know that Jesus rose from the grave. And therefore you can trust what He says.